Hello, this is Jeremy Sizemore with ASAP Talent Services, and this is our Executive Spotlight video podcast. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to be hosting Janet Robertson, a really well-known CIO at some of the bigger companies in the country. Most recently, Janet was CIO at Raytheon Technologies, helped lead them through a merger and formerly was a vice president at Collins Aerospace and also AT&T. Janet's out of Dallas, Texas, and thank you for joining us this morning, Janet.
Thanks, Jeremy, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So on today's, video podcast, we're going to hit a couple of different topics, but I just kind of, want to start out with, you went through a major merger, and that M&A process can be super difficult to integrate two big huge companies, and oftentimes these things have to be approved by the SEC. It can take a year or two, and then you finally get moving to merge these companies together, and it's a huge undertaking. Tell us a little bit about the challenges that you might have faced in the last year or two in your role there at Collins Aerospace and Raytheon Technologies.
It's funny, I sort of worked my way into mergers and acquisitions, starting back at AT&T when we did the DirecTV merger and then the Time Warner merger. And then that's part of the reason I was recruited into Collins Aerospace to work the Rockwell Collins and UTC Aerospace Systems merger at the time. And then, of course, you've heard all about the UTC and Raytheon merger. Challenges, it is 90% about the people most of the time, interestingly enough. I would say that, yes, there's monumental challenges when you talk about the technical infrastructure and merging networks and rationalizing applications and looking at security, even as small as what do we use for this PLM system? What do we do for our engineering CAD drawings? And how do we share them across the organization? The ones and zeros part, there's a formula to that, and you can do your rationalization, and it is a lot of heavy lifting. The biggest challenges, I think, are the people and the cultures. And while you may say that we have aligned values, the cultures of every different company have nuances and are very different. And I think that I'll even kind of go back to the cultures between AT&T and Time Warner. AT&T was a telecom company. Time Warner was a entertainment company with the mindset of lots of entertainment and lots of big wow and show. And AT&T was telecom, very straight in technology and fast focus. So just the personalities of the employees and the cultures coming together was a major clash of titans, right? So you would look at commercial aerospace with UTC after Otis and Carrier were divested, and you bring in a defense business, intelligence and space and defense and the protocols that are required to be in that space. The mindsets are totally different. You've got one group of an organization that does working on profit margin and like lowering costs and concerned about that. And then another that is working on government programs where there's completely different rules and accounting rules and just the policies around everything. It's the people coming together to find the best of both worlds that make a merger successful. And I think a lot of the change management seems to get overlooked sometimes in that space. So I would say, the biggest challenge is making sure you get the culture and the people right, because the ones and zeros and the technical plug and plays, while it is a very big lift, it has a formula. It can get done. But if the people are not aligned, if everybody's not rowing the boat in the same direction, there you've got the challenges going on.
Yeah, I think that's well said. When we do executive search for these VP and C-level roles, so many times I think the difference between A, who gets hired and who doesn't, and then B, who does a great job long-term at that company. I think the difference sometimes is not the stuff you see on paper on a resume. It's not the technical bullet points that they check off. It is the soft skills. It is the ability. It's the intellectual intelligence, the emotional intelligence, and it's the ability to work with different personalities and perspectives, right? So let me ask you a quick question. So and I know this is so challenging, like you said, when you have a CEO in the room and you have different divisional presidents, different lines of business, and they oftentimes bring their own perspective, right? A CFO could bring the finance perspective, or someone could bring an operational perspective, and then you have different lines of business. And when they're oftentimes not aligned in their vision, as a CIO leader, as an IT leader, how have you worked through that? What are you proud of about your ability and how you work in that difficult situation to have a good end result?
Know your audience. And before you go there's a lot of pre-work and a lot of socialization that has to be done. You may end up pitching the same program. You may end up pitching the same expenditure 4 different ways. The outcome's the same way, but you may pitch it 4 different ways and do your legwork that says, okay, my CFO is speaking to what is the bottom line? What's my ROI on this? The president of a division may be interested in how is it going to affect my people? How is it going to affect my margin that I'm going to report? Or how is it going to impact my downtime? I mean, they want to know if I'm going to monkey with their computer systems or any of their technical systems. Am I going to take their business down, or am I going to take their machines offline for a certain amount of time? So any programming, you have to look at it from all their different perspectives and lenses, and knowing your audience and knowing what they're interested in, what their end game is, you're able to tailor it and speak to those talking points.
Yeah, I
Skipping
think
over what
that's
you're talking about.
yeah, that's super well said. And I think another angle to look at the same thing you just said is, you know, asking the right questions and hearing these different customers that you're interfacing with, and they really are, for IT, these are our internal customers, and getting to know them and asking open-ended questions and really hearing them talk, giving them that chance to talk about what's on their mind. And then that helps you to know that customer. When you're,
Absolutely.
internally selling something, you have to know, how is it going to be received? What are the implications of this major program and project? And there could be some negatives that the company could face in a project, but it might have more pros that outweigh it. But anytime you're putting those complex proposals together, I think you really have to build that business case and understand that customer inside and out. And that's the difference, I think, in the A player C-suite. They are just so good at playing the and you could say it's internal politics, but it's even more than that. It's sincerely and authentically knowing the customer, knowing the business, knowing where we're going, and understanding that each person really does have their own perspective.
Well, and in technology, we're servant leaderships, right? So we're the catchball. So understanding your customers, your internal customers, your external customers, priorities, and I wouldn't propose a technology program that wasn't for the good and met any of their priorities. So it is a very tight relationship, because you have to know your customer inside and out. Delivering something that it could be the greatest since the sliced bread, but if it wasn't a priority to them, it's not going to be a value. It's not going to be used. The adoption is not going to be there. So really understanding and knowing your customers and being truly authentic with it, that, hey, I'm here to support you. I'm bringing all the technology expertise to support your priorities. Tell me what they are, and I will, go to bat for you and make sure that we're lined up. So
that's awesome. So look, don't say anything that's overly confidential on this next question, but is there one thing that you're super proud of having accomplished at any point in the last 2 or 3 stops in your career? Anything that you could share with the group that you're really proud of having accomplished?
Well, I'll start with the servant leadership. The thing that I am most proud of are some of the women that I've mentored over the last 5 years. They have been incredibly successful. I have the head of enterprise architecture. I met her 5 years ago. She was in India leading our India organization, 2 levels down from where she is today, and asked me to be her mentor. She wanted to move. She set her goals. She wanted to move to the United States, get her kids a great education, and she wanted to be an executive with the company. And she did it. I made suggestions. She made decisions, but it was the proudest thing, I'm so incredibly proud of her and the work that we did together to get her to her goals in 5 years. And so I would say that's the servant, one of the things I'm most proud of on the servant side.
I love that. It's not the same answer that I would hear from a lot of people if I asked the same type of question. And, that's really the stuff, that's legacy type stuff. It's the stuff that keeps making a difference, not just for 3 years, but the stuff that makes a difference for someone's entire career or life. So, and impacting others. So I think
there's
that's
a whole
awesome.
list of other, there's a whole list of like the technical accomplishments that I'm
Sure.
incredibly proud of.
Sure.
I am, I had gotten a lot of recognition for some of the robotic process automation, incorporating ChatGPT and AIML and some generative AI into some real productivity hour savings. But those are on this.
That's really cool. So some people that are listening, they don't always understand what is RPA. And then I think non-IT people, they hear that word robotic, right? And they have a certain idea on what they think that is, that it must be like a robotic arm doing something or some machine doing something. Tell us a little bit about what, like RPA or, I don't know if you guys used UiPath or whatever you did, but how can that help a business? How does that help them increase efficiency or solve problems?
It's essentially automating repetitive tasks. So it's, in the ultimate layman's terms, it's writing a program that allows all of the key strokes and some of the evaluations that a person would have to do over and over again, multiple times a day, and it's a repeatable task. We can automate that and save that person the time and the monotony of having to go through some of that. So it's taking a digital worker, is what we call them. It's not really a robot, but it's a digital worker. And we had names for our digital workers. I don't know if we personalized them so nobody felt like they were losing their job to somebody else, but they were losing, they were handing off the monotonous work so they could work on things that were more productive and required more thought behind it rather than just repetitive tasks. So we had like an automated financial close program that would reconcile numbers where someone else would have to do it visually, or they would have to run a little script to go compare numbers. This does it all behind the scenes and automates the financial close process, which was unbelievably successful. And it just runs and runs and runs. And your digital worker, while it's not free, your digital worker still costs money, but it's a lot less, and it works 24 hours a day. So.
Yeah, and there's some people will go, oh, but I'm losing my job, or someone's losing their job. But I think you said it well. It's the monotonous kind of busy work activity that's not a high value activity, and now people can focus on a higher value activity within their skill set. It's a tool that helps people to do what they do better. And to me, that's what same thing in recruiting, industry. People are like, oh, is ChatGPT going to replace recruiters? Or, is LinkedIn or Monster going to replace recruiters? And they've been saying this for 20 years now about new tech and how it's going to replace people. But what we really see, even from the Industrial Revolution, when the cotton gin was, came about, what we really saw was that it just changed the types of jobs that people did. We have emerging jobs like drone pilots that we never had 20 years ago, and these tools, that's what they are. They're tools that are going to help people to do whatever job or career that they're doing better. That's my take on it. But I think it was great to explain what is robotic process automation for those that maybe didn't know. So let's shift. I know SAP. A lot of my network is somehow involved in SAP, and the companies that you've been at, you were pretty involved in enterprise apps. You were pretty involved in enterprise architecture and major SAP implementations and upgrades and things like that. I'm going to share a screen here, and we're going to talk about something interesting that Janet and I were kind of talking about before we went live here. All right. So I'm sharing this infographic that was recently released by ASUG, and in the thread of this video podcast, I will share this ASUG infographic because it's really interesting. But we were particularly focused on a certain area, and it has to do with the frequency of upgrades it talked about, ASUG polled hundreds, if not thousands, of customers to get this data. And this was done by America's SAP user group. But it came back with 30% upgrade as needed, but not regularly, 24% every 2 to 4 years, 18% annually, all the way down to every 5 or more years is what some companies were doing. And we were just kind of talking about this pace of upgrades. First of all, Gina, as you know it, how might the pace of SAP upgrades be changing before our eyes as we move from on-prem to SAP in the cloud and SAP Rise and whatnot?
Yeah, so what we're hearing is the S4, excuse me, pardon me, frog in my throat. The S4 platform is going to require much more frequent upgrades than we had experienced in the past. And while that may not necessarily be as disruptive to a smaller organization, I'm coming from the AT&Ts and the RTX and Collins of the world that are a lot bigger, and it with multiple instances. And if we're looking at annual upgrades, even just to test and evaluate and the downtime that it would be required to do upgrades, it's a concern for everybody. And the 67% somewhat able to keep up, I can say probably with pretty good confidence that the larger corporations, the big multi-billion-dollar corporations, are not really able to keep up today. And I think the 67% that are somewhat able to keep up now with ECC and the regular upgrades that are going in is probably going to go lower, and we're going to see more unable to keep up if we have a higher frequency of updates. The diligence that has to be done, especially in the defense industry or any highly regulated industry, before you touch anything, is they say, oh, well, it's not going to be that disruptive. We're going to be able to do it really quickly, turn it around. But the diligence that we have to do is just so involved, and it's going to take time. So if you're looking at annually, you're basically going to finish one upgrade and start preparing for the next almost immediately. And then if you have multiple instances across the landscape, you're looking at overlap. You're having multiple full-time teams just to do SAP updates, or at least outsourcing those teams, and paying for that too. So it is a concern. I think that's something that, I've talked to some of my SAP folks. They're saying, oh, it's not going to be that hard. It's not going to be that hard. But I still am a skeptic when it comes to how hard that's going to be, just because I've lived through it so many times. And with these big mergers and acquisitions, it's not an immediate thing where you merge SAP platforms. The integration is a long, arduous process. So there's multiple instances across these larger corporations. Even though they have this dream of a one system to rule them all, it's not going to get there in a hurry. And it's very, very expensive, and the ROI on it is not great. So
yeah, I think the reality is we have so many customers that will use SAP for a lot of their core systems, but then they still might have Workday or Salesforce in there, and they might have other proprietary solutions or industry-specific softwares that still need to integrate with SAP. There's a lot of API work still going on. You have huge global companies that have grown through acquisition that might have a primary core ERP system, but their acquisitions have all kinds of different ERPs, and it is a challenging world that we all live in reality, right?
And every time you touch one of them, you have to test all of those integrations, because ultimately one will break, and it will be one that is the most important to that person that day, and it will break. I've lived it too many times to say, okay, we're going to do this seamless upgrade or update, and something not break, and it always.
Let me ask you just some open-ended questions about SAP. I've always wanted to ask, IT global leaders these types of questions, and for the market to be able to hear it. If you were advising a CEO, a CFO, or a CIO at a company, maybe it's an SME company that doesn't run SAP now, but they're looking at S/4HANA, they're looking at SAP Rise, they're looking at going to SAP from some older legacy systems. What kinds of things do they need to be thinking about what are the right questions they need to be asking themselves if they are preparing to go towards something like SAP?
They need to be prepared to streamline their business processes. I think the tool is not your savior, end all be all to complete your vision. The tool is there to help you enable and run your business more efficiently. And the tool is not meant to be customized to your failed business process, your struggling business processes. So
Well said. Well said.
the hardest part for business users especially is they blame the tool for it not working the way we used to work. Well, you have to get your mind and your intention set correctly around the fact that we're going to operate differently to be more efficient. And what does that look like? What makes sense for us? And it's a hard thing introspectively to say, the way I've done it for 20 years, or the way I've done it for 10 years is not the perfect way. It could be better, or it could be different. And there's a tool that can do this for me now, so I don't need Susie over here to heavy lift anymore. But we can have Susie do something different. But it is that mindset that you have to really get into before you look into implementing any tool, not just SAP and S4 Rise, or really any tool. And I would say that it's that coming together and that global blueprint that you have to do to set up your business to be prepared to implement the tool. It is almost, I would say, more about the business and the processes than it is around the tool. And that goes for anything that you're doing. We did so much across all the different M&As that I worked, so much portfolio and application rationalization. And ultimately, somebody's the loser, right? So my system didn't get picked. We're all going on to this one. So, I'm not going to use Dynamics anymore. I have to migrate to Salesforce, right? So somebody's angry about it. They're not happy. And everything's wrong about it, and they have to change. But with a mindset that says, okay, we're going to do this together for the greater good of the corporation. Again, circle back to the culture part. It's about the people. And any preparation for your tools has to be around not just the technology folks to get their mind around it and the change management, but the business folks that are going to be using the tool on a daily basis.
I love the way you put that, Janet. 10, 15, 20 years ago when I started recruiting in SAP, I heard it explained similarly. Someone said, that people will have a habit of thinking that some software is a band-aid to fix our problems, but they're not going in and fixing the core problem, the root of it. And that's that's the business processes, as you said. And, I've seen in my history of recruiting for 60, 70, 80 different companies implementing SAP, we've seen sometimes where it feels like, as a third-party external search firm, some companies are more robust in their business process group, where they'll have managers and directors of like order to cash and procure to pay and schedule to produce. And they really are taking business process reengineering super seriously. And then other companies maybe don't. Same thing with organizational change management. Some companies have a robust OCM group around, and that helps facilitate communication, not just across IT, but across the business. And the companies that tend to have the better programs that had a success story, they're not taking light of those things. And then we all have heard of companies that had a failed implementation, or different leadership got fired over it, or they wound up in the news for all the wrong reasons. We've all seen that and heard that as well. So
yeah,
that was well said. Yeah. Well, let's just shift just a little bit, as we kind of go into the last part of the podcast. You are sitting on a board now, and you've recently, well, I say recently, but you've evolved from where you were more of a VP to more of a CIO at this point in your career. And I think that you're sitting on a board. Tell me, why do you think it's important for public boards to have some sort of IT leader or IT perspective? What kind of value are you adding? And if they maybe weren't having that, what kind of gaps could they be looking at there in terms of how they make their decisions?
Well, looking at these big public companies that have their top priorities listed, cybersecurity is always going to be at the top. I think the security and the risk committees are the ones that nobody wants to sit on boards. So absolutely, the cyber aspect is the one at the top of the list. I think that our world has really evolved into truly digital. You think about how many transactions that you performed on a daily basis just on your phone, and your business is no different. Your technology and it's better. It's more than the electricity behind it. It's just always on. There is a perspective as fast as technology is evolving. Look at how fast ChatGPT came onto the scene and became everything that everybody wanted to talk about. Without a relevant and digital or CIO type board member on the board, you're missing a lot of opportunity, not just for the cool new innovation, but I think for cost and productivity, security, monetization of data, the way that a lot of these companies are collecting and processing data. There's so much more that could be done to further maybe monetize the data that they have, or manage, reduce cost, take cost out. There's a lot of gaps, I think, by not having that digital perspective in the new capabilities and new technologies that are out there, or just asking the right questions of the leadership of the company. So it's about asking and probing the right questions. And without that kind of expertise on a board, you don't have that probing. You have more of the business perspective and the MBA one, the dollars and cents, and less about the art of the possible and where else could we go.
Yeah, I think that summed it up well. And to your point, I think cyber, everyone is very aware of that. But I like the part of the answer that just talked about how much of our business is digital at this point. And these issues that major businesses are facing and how fast we're evolving as a society, IT plays a big role in all of it. If we just think about Amazon deliveries and how much faster they arrive on our doorstep now, that's supply chain, right? And IT, is the software that supports these supply chain processes, right? And everything around us has changed so fast in the last 20 to 30 years. And, it's not slowing down. It's only getting faster, how rapid we're changing. Yeah, and technology is the backbone of a lot of this rapid change that we're all experiencing. And so it's just that much more important to have that board perspective of a talented CIO or CIO, CTO, CISO type of IT executive than it ever has been, And then there's the quarterly reports. The CIOs have gotten in front of boards quarterly, but I think being on the board and sitting on the board and being on these risk management and audit committees is super important as well. So I really appreciate the conversation, Janet. I think that was absolutely outstanding. For those of you that find some of these topics really interesting, we encourage you to, chime in, and we'll be watching and communicating, Janet and I even within the thread. So encourage you guys just to keep the dialogue going. Thank you all for joining the ASAP Executive Spotlight today. And hope that you'll be on the lookout for future executive podcasts that will be coming out over the next quarter or two as well. Thanks again, Janet. Stay warm in Texas, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jeremy.